Hello, and welcome to the fourth and final session of the AARP and Social Innovation Summit virtual series, Longevity Plus, Understanding Evolving Lifespans in a Rapidly Changing World. For those of you I haven't had the pleasure of meeting before, my name is Olivia Brooks Allen, and my pronouns are she and her. I am a Caucasian woman with Mexican-American descent on my mother's side, with brown hair, hazel eyes, and I'm wearing a colorful silk blouse. I proudly serve as the Executive Vice President and Head of Events at Landmark Ventures, which hosts the Social Innovation Summit. I am joining you today from my home office in Connecticut. If you're not yet familiar with the Social Innovation Summit, we fondly refer to ourselves as SIS often. We're a team, a platform, and a collective community with over 16 years of experience designing ways to elevate groundbreaking ideas and innovative leaders who are changing the world for better. We do this work so proudly. I am honored to welcome you back for this series. We have been very proudly hosting alongside our friends at AARP since July. Now, not to worry, if you've missed any of our 3 sessions, we encourage you to go back and watch them at the link that will be shared in the chat in just a few moments. Now, as previously mentioned, today we will close out this incredible series focusing on the intersection of longevity and disability. Before we dive in, just a few housekeeping items for you. We're proud to have the American Sign Language interpreters joining the discussion today. And if you'd like to turn on closed captioning, simply navigate to the bottom of your Zoom window and select Show Captions. Additionally, our moderator today will be accepting questions from the audience to pose to our speakers as time allows. So you are welcome to submit your questions through the Zoom Q&A function. And with that, I am so pleased to welcome to the stage a longtime partner of the Social Innovation Summit and someone I count as a very dear friend, Stacy Alexander. She serves as the Vice President of Thought Leadership for AARP. She's going to introduce today's theme and moderate these thought-provoking discussions. Stacy, over to you.
As part of AARP's Policy, Research, and International Division, Thought Leadership at AARP elevates groundbreaking ideas, convenes innovative thought leaders, and advances work to change paradigms and surface new solutions so that everyone can live healthy and engaged lives. As Olivia mentioned, today is the 4th event in a 4-part virtual series in which we are so pleased to partner again with Landmark Ventures, host of the Social Innovation Summit. This series, this Longevity Plus series, has brought together renowned experts and industry leaders aimed at helping us explore how our understanding of longevity is changing and what it means for the most important questions facing businesses and organizations, both now and in the future. What brings us together on this series is a deeper look at the intersection of longevity and disability. 1 in 4 adults in the U.S. identify as having a disability. And as we age, we are more likely to experience disability at different points in our lives. We know that disability does not have to be a barrier to a longer and healthier life. And we are honored to be joined today by a dynamic group of leaders, self-advocates, and allies who will share their insights on promising ideas and innovative ways to build better tools, systems, and practices for people with disabilities as they age. Olivia has made some comments about accessibility, and we just want you to know that we have made every effort to ensure that all attendees are welcomed and supported. We encourage you to make use of Zoom's accessibility features, and keep in mind that during our time together, we will intentionally include a few pauses to allow for additional processing time. And we are continuously learning. So if you have ideas and recommendations to make our conversation even more accessible, please let us know. With that said, let's dive in. For the first part of our conversation today, I'm honored to be joined by 2 esteemed speakers. The first, Lydia X. Z. Brown, is Director of Public Policy at the National Disability Institute. They bring nearly 15 years of experience as a committed advocate, community organizer, and policy expert at the nexus of disability rights and disability justice. I'm also thrilled to welcome Howard Rosenblum, Chief Executive Officer of the National Association of the Deaf. Howard comes to the NAD after many years as a lawyer, focusing his practice on disability rights and special education law. Lydia and Howard, thank you so much for joining us today. Now, I'm going to ask you to tell us a bit about yourselves and about something you have been working on that is most exciting to you. And we'll start with Howard.
Hi there. So by way of introduction, I am Howard Rosenblum. Pronouns are he, him. And for a visual description, I am a white male, very bald, with sort of more than a 5 o'clock shadow, sort of salt and pepper, wearing a blue blazer, seated in front of a black background. And I am speaking to you from Silver Spring, Maryland, where the National Association of the Deaf is headquartered. I'm delighted to be here today to talk about longevity and disability and aging with all of you.
Great, thanks, Howard. And tell us a bit about something you've been working on that is most exciting to you.
Well, we often address barriers that are systemic, that our communities face, and that the broader society doesn't often realize if that were removed, that barrier removed, it would benefit everyone. This is often referred to as the curb cut effect. When the United States passed the Americans with Disabilities Act, a number of businesses and other stakeholders cited the expenses of changing the system to accommodate people with disabilities, and they questioned whether it was worth it. What they didn't realize at the time, and what we now know the outcomes show, is that by making businesses and infrastructure and society much more accessible, everybody has more access to everywhere else. And so that includes the requirement for sidewalks to have curb cuts. So some of us might remember when curb cuts were rare, but now they're at just about every intersection. They were initially required for wheelchair access, but very quickly we realized that everybody with wheels can benefit from them. Whether you're talking about caregivers pushing strollers, somebody pulling a suitcase, going to their office or the airport, any number of reasons a person might use wheels, curb cuts make it easier. It also is just a more level entry to the sidewalk. So if someone has a hard time making the complete step onto the curb, a curb cut makes it easier. So a curb cut is symbolic for all kinds of accessibility or accommodations that make things more accessible. For deaf people, what we are most interested in is accessible communication. So captions, for example, are not just about access to television programming. Events like this are captioned, and captions are available for everyone. And that enables everyone to understand in different ways. So that means that captions are not just for deaf and hard of hearing. Some people learn better with a visual aspect to communication. This also allows us to have a transcript available that would make translation into other languages more easy. And then on top of it, sign language is another form of access that deaf people can use to have access to events like this in the workplace and educational settings. This sort of accommodation, in addition to captioning, makes sure that everybody is included in the conversation. And that's representative of what we do at the NAD. We make sure that communication access is available in all kinds of places. We've been pushing more recently for streaming access. We started with Netflix. We made sure that all of their content was captioned because it initially was not. And we wanted to make sure that everything that was available on a streamed setting would be captioned. We're now turning our attention to the podcasting industry to ensure that podcasts are also available for people who are hard of hearing or deaf, to make sure that their content is available and accessible to everyone. So that's a little taste of what we're doing that's been exciting.
Great, thank you, Howard. And I should note that I will be looking down from time to time because I am taking notes, and most recently notes on the curb cut effect. So we'll move on to you, Lydia. Why don't you tell us about yourself and something you've been working on that is most exciting to you?
Hello, this is Lydia XZ Brown, sign name L Brown. My pronouns are they, them. I'm a youngish East Asian person with short black hair and glasses. I'm wearing a green collared shirt, and behind me is a fake background of a floor-to-ceiling, wall-to-wall bookcase in a gorgeous living room that I deeply envy and covet with every ounce of my being. I at the National Disability Institute, where we are focused on financial wellness, empowerment, and inclusion for people with disabilities. And one area of our work that I'm particularly passionate about that many organizations don't necessarily have as much on their radar is our work around building financial capacity and wealth building avenues for people with disabilities. People with disabilities are twice as likely to live in poverty as non-disabled people and face lifetime earnings disparities, income gaps, and disparities in net wealth as compared to non-disabled people. Disparities that are only exacerbated for people with disabilities who live at intersections of race and gender and other axes of marginalization. And we rightfully focus much advocacy in disability advocacy on supporting those who are most impacted by systematic impoverishment, cycles of poverty, and by the issues attendant to economic insecurity. But I'm excited by our work to both be reactive and responsive to the crisis economically that disabled people face, and to think imaginatively and expansively about what possibilities for a future in which our public policy and our practices support disabled people in being able to think past mere survival and past mere basic necessities, and where it would become possible for our community members to think about living a full lifespan and to be able to participate in the economic mainstream, to build wealth, to be able to live a decent lifestyle that does not have to be defined simply by the lowest common denominator. And that work involves working and collaborating with financial institutions. It involves creating and providing technical assistance to states and providers in supporting people with disabilities and understanding finance and having access to credit, and in changing policy to address longstanding racial, gender-based, and disability disparities in access to income, in sustainable and supported employment, in access to housing, and in access to services and supports that people with disabilities might need that non-disabled people do not, that make it possible to live a good life.
Thanks, LZ and Lydia, and thank you kind of for talking about this whole vision of living a full lifespan. Rebecca Coakley, Program Officer of the U.S. Disability Rights at the Ford Foundation, has described how for the first time in history, people with disabilities are aging in public, whereas previously limits in life expectancy and the institutionalization of people with disabilities made aging with disability a different experience in the eye of the public. So what does this shift over time require us to rethink or restructure? Lydia, you've mentioned some of the financial challenges, but kind of just in general, this question is to both of you. You know, what do we need to rethink to really envision a longer, healthier life for people with disabilities? We can start
Lydia,
with
would you like
Lydia.
to
Okay,
first?
sorry.
This is Lydia. People with disabilities, by definition, experience changes over the course of our lifetimes in our bodies and minds that non-disabled people might not. And NDI published a report very recently in which we calculated the additional cost of living with a disability, finding that on average, disabled people need to earn 28% more income than similarly situated non-disabled people just to maintain the same standard of living. And that being an average indicates, of course, that there are many disabled people for whom that additional cost of living with a disability might be substantially higher than 28% of the income for the otherwise similarly situated non-disabled person. We know now that people with disabilities face severe and sometimes catastrophic gaps in what our social services and social safety net are able to provide. In order to be eligible to receive Medicaid funded services, which is the only health insurer that is mandated to provide long-term support and services that are necessary for many people with a wide range of physical and mental disabilities, as well as for much of the aging population, that you need to have countable assets that are at such low levels that most people, in order to stay eligible for Medicaid, are unable to ever escape poverty in order to remain eligible for those services. Now, a large number of states have adopted Medicaid buy-in programs, which allow for some people with disabilities who are earning income that would be substantially higher than the federal poverty line to be able to still participate in Medicaid, in some cases by paying part of the premium for their own health care to do so. And yet that still is not enough to meet the needs of a wide range of people with disabilities who cannot afford the cost of long-term care and supports. We already know that the aging population overall, even those who did not have a disability before becoming elderly, often cannot afford the cost of care out of pocket, and that what is available requires either accruing a massive amount of debt products that are financially burdensome, spending down assets, having to undo whatever gains a person might have had over the course of their lifetime and attempting to save money and to grow assets. And that many of our elders are left in a position where they and their families will not be able to afford care. And for those who've already lived with the lifelong impact of being a disabled person, where access to services is not guaranteed and may require a cycle of lifelong poverty, those issues are only all the more stark. Many disabled people also are faced with harsh choices between choosing whether or not to work and participate in the economic mainstream, or choosing to remain eligible for those life-sustaining services. Others are subjected to decision-making processes that don't necessarily factor in working capacity or interest, but are nonetheless arbitrary. For example, more states now are widely using algorithmic-based determinations to determine who should be eligible to receive home and community-based services under Medicaid, and what amount of services or what dollar amount should be allocated for a particular person's services. And as litigators in Idaho and in Arkansas, among other states, have uncovered, that those algorithmic decision-making systems have often penalized many disabled people and forced people to become at risk for early institutionalization due to loss of services that would otherwise have been covered or funded by the Medicaid program. And so disabled people face this wide array of choices where everything from choosing whether or not to marry can impact your eligibility to continue receiving Social Security benefits, to whether or not to work and earn above a certain amount of income, forcing someone again to choose between lifelong poverty or earning a comparable income to people without disabilities with otherwise similar levels of education and professional skills. And this is just the tip of the iceberg. Of course, there are many deeply interrelated issues in terms of access to education and job training, as well as access to stable and supportive housing, which is the basis for being able to look for work opportunities or to receive continuity of care from a provider.
Thank you, Lydia. It's clear the issue of economic stability. There's a lot of work to be done. Howard, I'll shift to you. Based on your work previously as a lawyer and also with NAD, what do you think that we need to rethink or restructure as we look forward to more people aging with disability and increased health span?
Sure, this is Howard. In addition to the economic points that Lydia just shared, we need to also restructure how people view disability. Typically, people think of disability as meaning quite literally being unable, and therefore it's something undesirable. And that prevents many people as they age and maybe do start to experience different kinds of disabilities It makes them reluctant to even consider the idea that they have a disability. It makes them reluctant to seek out assistance or accommodations or adaptations to improve their quality of life. I'd like to see an end to that. It's not easy to change mindsets of entire societies, but there are some things that help, such as media portrayals, how the media frames people with disabilities. That will certainly help a lot of people in the mainstream to become much more accepting of the idea of disability. I can't tell you how many times my own relatives have been reluctant to getting a hearing aid. Most people say no, that they think they can hear just fine. And as a person who grew up with severe hearing deficiencies, I can tell when people are having a hard time hearing. And so I pick up on changes in relatives' behaviors and suggest hearing aids, and just about everyone initially responds that they're just fine. I've even offered to take relatives to the audiologist, and we can go together and get a dual checkup. But that's sometimes what it takes, and I don't think it should. I think it should be part of everyone's mindset that what we want to do is maximize our living. And part of that is acceptance of who we are, and how that changes. So if my eyesight changes, if my hearing ability changes, if other aspects of my physical capability or functioning changes, it should be that we see it as fine and we can still live a great life and see people with disabilities who are doing great things as examples, because we live and we are doctors, we are lawyers, we're scientists, rocket scientists even. We have any number of positions. So why can't people who are aging, who find out that they have new disabilities, have similar experiences? There's no reason for people to think that their life is just going downhill, that instead they can still maximize their lives by recognizing and accepting their disabilities and working with others to figure out how you can truly maximize your life in those ways.
Thank you, Howard. I have another question for you. You talked about how people view disability and really kind of challenging and changing that. And we know some of the things that people value are work as an economic lever, but also as a means for purpose. So what do you see as some of the ongoing challenges for people with disabilities when it comes to the job market and being part of the workforce? And what do you see as solutions to address these challenges?
You want the long answer or the short answer?
Let's see, we have about 8 minutes left. So how about a medium answer?
Well, I want to make sure that I allow time for Lydia to chime in as well. So I think it starts with attitudes. Truly, people with disabilities often, just in the very beginning, like children with disabilities, are often told to have lesser expectations. Their parents are told to lower their expectations. I think those mindsets need to be done away with. And people really need to look for the ways that these children can do anything, whether it's with technological supports, other types of supports, or training that fits their unique needs to allow them to achieve their dreams. A lot of people with disabilities also acquire their disabilities later in life. In some ways, that experience is a bit harder, because when a person has grown up with a disability, it's part and parcel of who they are and their identity. When they acquire a disability later in life, the older that they are when they acquire that disability, they often go through a phase where they assess that they're not the person that they used to be, and they grieve over this change. But I think there needs to also be the realization that change is fine, difference is just different. And that shifting into a new person, taking on this new identity, having different abilities and skills also means that you can learn new things. So I think we as a society do need to provide better resources, better training, better avenues to help people adjust Because right now, most people are left to their own devices, including financial disincentives, as Lydia just outlined. So I think all of that needs to shift so that as people acquire a disability, or if their abilities change, if they're in the workplace, they can figure out ways to get the assistance that they need to remain in the workplace. For most people, when they're faced with disability, their first thought is to go see their doctor. But doctors aren't the right people. Doctors are working toward a cure or a resolution to the disability. But there are a number of other professionals and organizations who have expertise to work with people with disabilities to find out what sorts of things would work best for them, what resources they might need, and to advise on economic impacts and how to redirect or shift their future directions. And I think that applies to the corporate world too, as it relates to employment, HR professionals. I think many people have an initial negative reaction to people with disabilities. And even if they do want to hire someone, it's often with the mindset of this is a charity case. They don't really hire a person with a disability thinking this is the most qualified applicant for the job. And that needs to change. We need media portrayals of talented people with disabilities just doing their jobs like everyone else, so that it will shift how people see people with disabilities, so that it's not a matter of being unable, it's just a matter of being different.
Thank you, Howard. Lydia, if you indulge me for a minute, I'd love to shift gears just a bit in our remaining time and ask a little bit about health, and particularly health disparities among people with disabilities. We know recently the National Institutes of Health designated people with disabilities as a population within health disparities. And we hope that this designation will open the door for more research and interventions to advance health equity for people with disabilities. And I'd love to know what you think might be the top advancement you would like to see in healthcare delivery for people with disabilities, and what would it take to get there?
This is Lydia. First of all, I really want to answer the last question, but
Okay.
secondly, you want me to pick just one. There's so many priorities that we need to focus on in health disparities and health equity research. But in the interest of only semi-revolting, I will offer two priorities that I think should be top of mind in furthering what our research priorities should look like. Our health equity is a core component of being able to achieve financial wellness, because if you are not living in good health and have your needs attended to, then you're not going to be in a position to be economically secure, especially in the society in which we live, where you can look every day on GoFundMe.com and see hundreds, if not thousands, of people's fundraisers for everything from cancer treatment to a new wheelchair to some form of mental health support in the wake of tragedy and trauma. And that model of healthcare is unsustainable and has disastrous impact, particularly on people of color and disabled people, and especially those who are disabled people of color. So two innovations that I would love to see more research on in the field of health impacting people with disabilities are, one, research into long-term efficacy and sustainability of peer-led and peer-provided health services. There is an increasing number of clinicians working in a wide variety of areas who share the same disabilities, including psychosocial disabilities or chronic illnesses, that their clients and patients do, providing service at levels and in terms of quality that is almost unparalleled when seeking services and support from providers and models that are predicated on the assumption that those providing the services do not come from the community and do not share experiences. And just as many people might seek to prioritize finding providers who share a cultural, religious, or racial background with them in order to have less likelihood of discrimination, less likelihood of disparate treatment, and a greater likelihood of cultural understanding, people with disabilities also deserve to have access to those opportunities. And there are some fantastic examples of where that's been done. Like, for example, there's now a growing network of therapists and mental health clinicians who are themselves neurodivergent and or have other psychosocial disabilities. There is a practice in the Washington, D.C. area that specializes in Ehlers-Danlos syndrome, in which multiple providers who are medical doctors also have Ehlers-Danlos syndrome themselves. And there are practices of nurses and doctors who themselves use wheelchairs, they are blind or they are deaf, and they are a beacon of hope and access to members of their community. And yet disabled people routinely face exclusion in access to education and access to the workforce. I promised I would tie it back into that last question. And that occurs systematically through policy and practice, as well as the tools that are used to screen people out of the workforce altogether, whether that's through human discrimination or discrimination by algorithm. But another area that I would love to see—
Lydia, I'm so sorry to interrupt you. Can we wrap in like about 30? I'll give you 30 more seconds, and then we'll shift over to Howard. And we just did not have enough time for all of this, so we'll have to have a part 2 to this conversation.
Let's have a part 2.
Okay.
The second thing I'd love to see is research on what policies we can implement to guarantee long-term funding, which we do not have, for all people to have access to home and community-based services throughout our lives and as we age.
Thank you. And Howard, I'll give you a few seconds to wrap us up, kind of share your thoughts.
Sure. So between myself and Lydia, I think you've gotten a lot of information about the challenges that people with disabilities face in aging. The list is certainly long and growing. We do need better care in terms of health, mental health, employment, financial planning, housing, how society views us. Part of the challenge, though, also is that we need to talk about the services that are offered by various state departments on aging. So most states' departments on aging don't even think about disability, which is surprising because a high percentage of people who are aging are also experiencing disabilities. But each state department of aging needs to do a bit better and look at how they can better serve their consumer base, their populations in their states who are getting older, and make sure that they have access to healthcare, mental health care access, peer-led supports and services, as Lydia mentioned, adaptations, resources for any disability that may present itself. All of their content and information should be captioned. They need to have some available in American Sign Language, among other types of accommodations. So we need to do our part to make sure that all services available statewide are available and appropriate for people with disabilities.
Wow, again, this is we covered a whole lot in a very short amount of time. So I want to thank both of our speakers for being so gracious and sharing your insights with us. This was a lot to process and think through, and we're really excited about the work ahead and the power for people with disabilities to continue to advance and achieve healthy lifespan. So Lydia and Howard, thank you again for joining us today.
Thank you so much for having us.
Thank you. And we're going to transition now to our next speakers in today's event and start to drill down a little bit on innovation. I'm thrilled to introduce Grace John, an assistant professor at the University of Georgia, researching design processes inclusive of disability, with a focus on accessible graphic design and adaptive fashion. Grace has a book coming out in May of 2024, Fashion, Disability, and Co-Design. I'm also very happy to introduce Gina Klein, founder and managing partner of Able Ventures and founder of Smart Job. Gina is an investor, entrepreneur, civil rights lawyer, and thought leader dedicated to building the future of work by advancing the rights and interests of people with disabilities as innovators, workers, business owners, and consumers. So Grace and Gina, thank you so much for being here today. I'll ask you the same question that I asked to open up with the first panel. Can you briefly tell us a bit about yourselves and about something you have been working on that is most exciting to you? And we'll start with Grace.
Great. I'm so excited to be here. Thank you so much, Stacy and AARP. Grace John, I identify as she, her. I'm a Korean American woman with today straight hair due to the weather and a red turtleneck to stay cozy indoors, zooming, and silver earrings that were given to me by my grandmother. And so I'm based in Atlanta, Georgia, and I'm currently teaching as a tenure track professor at the University of Georgia in communication design, but more so researching on design processes that could be inclusive of disability. So the past decade, I've been working on how to incorporate this into higher education and started as one of the founding members of an organization called Open Style Lab, which is a nonprofit. It's a Smithsonian National Award-winning disability organization that teams designers, people with disabilities, and engineers and therapists to co-design together for a summer. And so as a board member, I'd love to kind of explain a little bit more about that, but for the lack of time, and for what I've been doing now, is basically mostly about my book. And so thank you, Stacy, for mentioning it. I've just finished designing the cover. So it'll be out in Bloomsbury, UK next May 2024. It's called Fashion, Disability, and Co-Design. And it shows more application-based and practical examples of how to apply disability needs in design, particularly clothing.
Great, thanks, Grace. Gina, on to you.
Thank you so much, Stacy, and thank you, Grace. It's good to be with you. I'm Gina Klein. I'm the founder and managing partner of Enable Ventures, which is an impact venture capital firm that invests in closing the disability wealth gap. And I am a white woman in a white jacket, actually. Zooming in from my home office, I use she, her pronouns, and I'm just delighted to be here. And to chat a little bit with you, Stacy and Grace, about our work and our collective work with the community in leveraging a capital markets approach to investing in the next generation of inclusively designed technology that will drive changes in school, skills training, education, and at work. And very happy to be here. And also very excited, impressed, and delighted to be with colleagues Lydia Brown and Howard Rosenblum.
Thank you, Gina. And as Howard mentioned, all design is universal design. It benefits everybody. Anything that's been designed for folks with disabilities ultimately will benefit the greater population. And so it takes all of us to be involved in that design work. And so my question is, what does it mean to you to be a good ally in this work? And how does one put that into practice? And we can start with Grace.
Yeah, I think this is Grace, being a good ally in this field is really trying to make the space to listen and ask. I cultivate this many times in my class by inviting people with disabilities who are experts of their body. They're also experiences with lived disabilities, and also being able to share about adaptations that many people with disabilities have already done. And so trying to provide that space where we could have conversations around intersectionality and interdisciplinary ways to creatively and innovatively approach solutions together, I think is really important to be as an ally and an advocate. And most of the times that really ends up being saying, hello, how do you identify yourself? And just kind of starting from there. And would you like coffee?
And Gina, what about in your experience? How does one put that into practice?
Well, I think that it's a work in progress for us all, that we are challenged today in a world that has so often pathologized difference. And yet we know that that's how civilizations fail. And when civilization, and particularly democracy, thrives, it's when we look for value in our differences. And I think I've been an ally or aspired to be a good ally in a lot of different roles in my career so far. I was a civil rights lawyer at the Justice Department's Disability Rights Section. I was a private lawyer that represented folks like the National Federation of the Blind. And now I'm an investor that invests in people with disabilities and their companies to support the sustainability of their businesses. And I think that we have to realize that we need to put a premium on active listening, that listening is actually an athletic exercise. Because if we're really seeking value and difference, we need to really find it in our conversations with each other and uncover it together. And in many ways, we're indexing high on investing in difference. Many of the entrepreneurs that we work with see the world differently. They test technology, and particularly the design discipline with which they create technology, differently than other entrepreneurs in the market. And the way to be an ally is to listen for those differences, to identify them as core value, and to allow those ideas to be born in a way that they can generate value across society. That, you know, Howard so beautifully described the core value of the ADA as the curb cut effect. What we are seeing now in the capital markets and in the places that technology is made is we're seeing curb cut effects in everything from educational technology to work technology to communication technology and so on. And it's derived from the ingenuity and ideas of people with manifold diversities. And being a good listener counts. And knowing that you're honoring where ideas are born and how they're born differently and ascribing a value to that is how we're seeing a lot of changes in society.
Gina, thanks. You talked about kind of the investment side. I'd love to know, has funders' relationships with disability changed over time? And how do you see that changing as it intersects with longevity?
Yes. Well, for generations, you say the word disability, and as it relates to capital, people think charity. And there's been a long history of discrimination that has coincided with the idea of charity and pity. And the disability rights movement, like many civil and human rights movements, has had that to overcome. That this is not a conversation merely about charity anymore. The ADA has grown up, being more than 3 decades old. And there's a group of people now, the ADA generation, who've grown up with both civil and human rights and technology. And they are elevating the idea of disability as innovation and not charity, the idea of disability as core value to the rest of society. And now in that moment, as that generation has entered prime working age years, and their predecessors, the work of their predecessors to bring about civil rights in this country has borne the fruit that we are seeing a marketplace for those ideas, and not just traditional philanthropy, but investors that have come to the table to invest in those ideas and scale them. So there is a shift that's happening, that is happening because of the innovations and the aspirations of the ADA generation.
I love that concept of elevating idea of disability as innovation in and of itself. Grace, tell us a little bit about what you've seen in your work about the opportunities for innovation and kind of how you see societal attitudes changing or impacting the work that you do.
Yeah, I first love Gina's comment on, I guess, nonprofits and kind of seeing the pity charity model. I think that was like that for me 10 years ago when I talked about disability and design. And today I see a different conversation with lots of corporations, other organizations, nonprofit and for-profit, on seeing the value of innovation behind a lot of the things that are created by people with disabilities. And so some of the things that I research and have worked on are primarily products, but also clothing that are accessible for people with disabilities, but not just ascribing clothes and products to them, but to find ways, how do we work together and learn from each other and make this as a good process for also the younger generations, such as students and young adults, to be able to really work with different disability communities and groups. As we know, for many groups, whether you have autism or spinal cord injury, they're all in their different organizations, but rarely do they coincide with design, and particularly fashion. And back to Howard's point, to make things desirable and stylish and innovative is exactly the reason why I do my work today, in hopes that that could change the attitudes, and especially how we approach learning around our differences to be more integrated into education early. And so that's kind of the changes I see. And a lot of corporations are kind of getting attuned to being excited about disability as innovation and about that work through advocacy and for incorporating that into their products.
Thank you. And just a point of personal privilege, I'm the parent of a child with, well, actually a young adult with autism and cerebral palsy, and having adaptive clothing and equipment that, you know, that provides confidence is a game changer. It's a game changer in how folks can move about in the world and what they believe that they can do and accomplish. And so I want to ask you both, how can we ensure that these emerging innovations and also assistive technologies, that they're inclusive and accessible for individuals with varying disabilities, but also across different age groups?
I could.
Sure.
Okay.
Oh, Gina,
would you like to go, Grace?
No, I spoke. It's your turn.
What I was going to share is that there is just as there's a demographic transition, you know, the previously mentioned ADA generation, there is a shift from technology that was created and generated as point solutions to remove barriers in people with disabilities' lives that may have been solely or principally in a medical reimbursement lane. There's now a shift to consumer-focused, affordable products, the kind of turnkey solutions that can serve as tools in people's lives in the general technology market. And the reason I mention that is, to your point, Stacy, there are solutions that are being born in this market that have to do with mobility, cognition, communication and speech, and so on and so forth, that will generate change in a young person's life as they transition from school to work, just as well as an older aging individual's life as they transition from one form of work, maybe to another, as they transition through all stages of life. And there was a time in the technology market when there was a question about the who, and who were consumers with disabilities, and is there a sustainable marketplace? And the answer is sort of unequivocal, that this is the largest minority on earth. This is a majority minority. And albeit a heterogeneous one, there are many facets, both culturally, economically, and socially, to the disability community. But the through line has been that there is a long overdue need for this multi-billion person population, which is approximate to 15% of the global population, to be met with the kind of technology that people can use in school, work, and as part of aging. And that because of the market size of that group, which has $8 to $9 trillion annual disposable income, when you count friends and family, 13 trillion. Because of the market size, that there is this opportunity to future-proof technology for one's lifetime value, meaning that there's an opportunity to build work-related technology for the young worker and the older worker, mobility technology for the young person and the older person. And we should be looking at that opportunity set as one to drive changes in closing skills gaps, in rectifying some of the failures that Lydia so articulately described in access to healthcare. One of the things that we are most focused on is that we know that there is a intrinsic link between health and wealth, and that when people with disabilities work and acquire upward mobility, it drives better long-term health outcomes, and it reduces public costs. And we are looking at technologies every day that are driving more affordability and more access points to work, and skilling workers with tools as they compete in the economy. whether it be skills training, tech, that is geared towards 21st century career pathways, work-related technology that drives accessibility, captioning, as Howard was mentioning. So there is a unique opportunity for this diverse coalition of end users to benefit from the tech that's being born in this market. And then I will yield to something brilliant from Grace, as she was just about to say it a couple minutes ago.
Oh no, this was fantastic lead up. But yeah, I can't even agree anymore about the market size, and really to that saying that aging is the disability we will all face at some point in our lives. And to understand that, we have thought about technology as such an innovative factor and something that's always constantly changing, but the design of clothing is something that's lagged behind, like eating, shelter, and how we clothe ourselves. And seeing clothes as like a human right or a basic to human right is not just looking good or feeling great, but that adaptation needs to age with you for longevity reasons and also health reasons. I've seen from many of my research that clothes could also create pressure sores. It could also be disastrous for certain personal health hygiene. It's also not enough to see in the workplace attire for specific uniforms that are designed for employees with disabilities. And so I love it that we're talking about innovation and also longevity, because those two things are really what drives for the future to have different ways to adapt for our changing bodies and our changing needs as a society that's growingly more diverse, but also I think we're learning to see more diverse people. Whereas probably 40 years ago, there wasn't Instagram or Facebook to do so. But with that, I think the future could really benefit, back to your question, Stacy, on how do we create more collaboration between either industry, nonprofits, enable ventures, of course, leaders in the disability field that helps us kind of learn. And instead of being siloed, and especially in higher education or in disability-specific groups or even just design groups in general, how do we come together? And that, I think, is going to be the solution for us to kind of look into different longevity solutions and sustainable issues.
Thanks. And you've both really kind of made the argument and highlighted about how large this market is and the amount of people that this will impact, across all ages. So what promising approaches do you see right now that's really working as you think about designing services, policies, and products that people with disabilities not only need but want? What are you seeing that's working that we should pay attention to? And this is for both of you, so you can.
Well, I think that there is tremendous promise for those that are innovators working with a certain design discipline. And that design discipline causes an innovator and an entrepreneur in the market to stress test the products they're creating for whether or not there are unanticipated consequences to consumers being excluded from its design, meaning that from the beginning, that innovator is desiring to be radically inclusive in product design. And the reason I say that is that even if technology in front of us is designed as a point solution for people who are deaf and hard of hearing, because it's a captioner, we are seeing captioners that are finding efficacy in conveying communication in real time to people who are deaf and hard of hearing, while also generating very specific and detailed notes to somebody in the same meeting with learning disabilities, and also conveying value to somebody who stepped out of the room and came back and needed a recollection of what they missed. And this is back to Howard's point about the promise of thinking and designing inclusively, the curb cut effect, is that there is this potential for the design discipline that is born from the experiences of the disability community to generate social value, whether social value at work, social value in school and skills training, or social value in companies that are being born and are growing and scaling, and as they grow and scale, are hiring inclusively. We have a nearly $2 trillion hole in GDP where disability talent should be, and that's inclusive of the aging population. And we have a significant opportunity set for the design discipline of the disability experience to drive and generate value in closing that hole and that wealth gap.
I think Gina summarized it for me most, but I'll just probably close off in agreeing, if not echoing, that just putting people with disabilities in your process, whether it's a product or a service or any type of idea you want to do together, is so important, because disability is not a monolith. And therefore, you'll find multiple ways where intersection and common denominators between aging and disability also collide for design. I think it's really important to kind of observe that process to make sure whose voice is not included, and to make some effort to get to learn for yourself and for others to have a process that is truly inclusive as much as possible. And starting somewhere. I know it can be kind of also daunting for people who are not in this space. And I think the current things that are happening today are so much more innovative in the approach it's taking. I feel like I've learned so much from my disabled friends on how they've been already adapting a lot of their needs through their environment and through the clothing and products that they use, that I feel like would only change and adapt as we all age longer, and hopefully also in different ways across the states. And so, yeah, I think mostly it's about process, and hopefully more time together.
Yeah, thanks so much. Again, not enough time for all the stuff, but you left us with some very, very powerful nuggets of information, and also a lot of cause for optimism. So thank you very much. And also thank you to our engaged audience members for joining us today. We'll be following up via email with a link where you can check out a recap of today's session and continue the conversations. It's been a pleasure for our Global Thought Leadership team to partner with the Social Innovation Summit on this Longevity Plus series and help us all understand how longevity is changing and what it means for the most important questions facing businesses and organizations, both now and in the future. So this is not the end of the conversation, it's the end of this series, but this work continues, and we encourage you all to engage with us. So again, thank you for joining us today, and thank you for all of our incredible speakers.